My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode. On today's episode, we interview Dr. Rebecca Levy-Gantt, a board-certified OBGYN physician practicing in Napa Valley. Dr. Gantt will talk to us about her career as an author, writing books such as Womb with a View and Perimenopause for Dummies, as well as her clinical practice as a solo OBGYN, something almost unheard of. Dr. Gantt will explain to us her journey into medicine, starting as a physical therapist, considering a career in PM&R, and ultimately finding her true love in OBGYN. She will talk to us about her trials and tribulations and her tenacity, which led her to an amazing private practice in wine country. We know you will enjoy this inspiring episode. Rebecca Levy-Gantt, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, Rebecca. So you live in Napa Valley. That sounds spectacular. Tell us about Napa and what the area is like.
Well, it's a really interesting area. Obviously, it's beautiful and a lot of tourists come here. So I've definitely gotten the idea of what it feels like to live where a lot of people want to come. And there's always traffic in your area of people who don't really live here. But it's all worth it because it's really beautiful to live here. And I moved here from Long Island. So I used to live there, and not that I don't like Long Island, but given the choice, I'd rather live here. And it's a kind of small community. It's like a lot of people know each other here. Like my husband was a teacher here for many years, and I've been an OBGYN in the area for about 15 years, and we cannot go anywhere without somebody saying, you delivered my baby, or you taught me in the band class. So it's really kind of nice with a small town feel, but a very beautiful area to live.
Sounds amazing. And I'm sure the wine is very good also. Is that right?
So much good wine. Guess what people give me after I deliver their baby?
Can't guess. So, Rebecca, tell us a little bit about how your practice is now. I understand you're in solo OBGYN practice, and I think that you're the only one that I've ever met like that. So tell us about how you started your practice in Napa and how you built a solo practice there.
It was totally, but not by my own design. It is not something I ever really wanted to do, own my own practice, especially as an OBGYN. And there's a reason you don't know anybody else who does this. They're crazy. What happened was I was living here in Napa and I'm very happily employed in a group private practice, and thought I had the best of all the worlds because it wasn't me with all the responsibility. There were other doctors and a group of midwives. It was wonderful. And then the doctor who ran the practice said he was going to retire and would I like to take over his practice? And that was a big NO. I did not want to take over his practice. I was like, I never want to own my own practice. And he said, okay, I'll sell it to someone else. And he sold it to a federally qualified health system. So they became the owners, like they absorbed the practice into their health clinic. And for a while, it was really great because then I felt my true calling was really keeping all my old private patients and also being able to serve the whole community of those patients who get their care in an FQHC. So the care was great. We still had a big group. And we still were delivering at the local hospital. The midwives would take first call. Me and one other doctor would do second call. And I loved it for a little while. And then something happened where the people who paid the bills realized that if they were going to have midwives doing first call and doctors backing them up, they had to pay the midwife and the doctor at the same time to be on call in case one of us had to go in to do a C-section or a difficult delivery. And that was probably out of their budget. So they let all the midwives go. And then there was just me and one other doctor. And then I was doing 15 nights a month on call out of 30. And that was definitely not in my plan because I was dying. The problem was in Napa, there are not an abundance of group private practices. So if I left that situation, maybe I could go and work in another situation. There are no other situations here. There's one group here in town, which is a very lovely, like 4 or 5 person group. They're employed by the local hospital. So they work for the foundation, that hospital. And then there was me. And that's it. Kaiser is very big here in California, and that's a whole other entity. That's a big HMO. So you can work within the Kaiser system, which I know very many people who work within that system, but that also wasn't really something I wanted to do. So I was stuck without a job, so to speak. So there were a few people, the ancillary staff, like let's say that worked in that office, the office manager and a couple of medical assistants, et cetera, came to me and said, go start your own practice. We will come with you. And I was like, no, I don't know how to start my own practice because I knew nothing about business. I never took a business class. I barely balanced my checkbook. So I said, let's go look at some properties. And one thing led to another. And these 3 lovely women who said, we'll do the books, we'll run the practice, we'll do everything. And before we knew it, I was signing a contract. I had 3 employees. I had no money, but I went to the local chamber of commerce and took all the classes on how to get a business loan and how to start banking and what kind of lawyer do you need. And we started before we even had a property. We got a Google phone number. That's how we started working. And the phone would go to our cell phones and we were making appointments as if we had an office, which we did not have.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story. And obviously, when everything's up and running and working, it always seems like easy and great, but that is not easy. And it's a lot of risk, right? It's so much easier just to go work for the hospital and be employed, it seems like.
Totally, totally. And one of the things I decided to do, and this was off anybody's charts, I said, I still want to deliver babies. So what I did was I would look at my calendar a year in advance and I would plan all of my vacations out. And then when I would take newly pregnant patients, we would pull out the calendar and go, oh, look, you're going to be 37 weeks when Dr. Levy's out of town. You don't really want to come here. So I really limited my OBs all that time. And in more than 10 years of doing that, I only missed maybe 2 or 3 deliveries because they delivered early or something like that. So I was like, sorry, I'm not going to take you on if I don't feel like I'm going to be around to deliver you.
That's absolutely amazing that, people are so focused on work-life balance. And it sounds like you were just worrying about your patients and you were actually scheduling your vacation around when babies were going to pop out, right? That's amazing.
And my husband and I, between us, we have 5 kids who are now all adults. So we have grandchildren. So we've got things to do. So people kind of were very understanding about, I get you have a schedule. And I get babies don't always fit into that, but somehow I was really able to keep a handle on that. I just stopped doing OB last year after 10 years here, like after 30 years completely, but after 10 years in private practice. So that's 10 years of being the solo person who does 9 months of care and then is there for the delivery. And that people would look at me and go, how do you do that? And I go, I have a calendar.
And obviously you love it, right? Like if you didn't love it, you wouldn't be doing it, I would think.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, even the way that I got into OB, which we can get into later, it was kind of a one-off, like didn't really think that's what I was going to do and then ended up loving it. Same thing about like doing private practice. There's so much headache, but the reward is really great. So yes.
So Rebecca, just a question for you. If somebody comes to you, let's say a young OB who's not going into practice in Napa, they're not competing with you, they're in Michigan, and they call you up and say, listen, I know you're in solo practice and it sounds like your practice is great. I'm thinking about doing it too. Like, what do you tell them? Do you say, don't do it, go get a job somewhere? Do you say, listen, if you really think this is what you want to do, go for it?
I mean, there's someplace in between being a solo and go getting an employed position. And those practices are be in a group practice, not too many in the group, but enough so that you can get to know your own patients, because that is the lovely thing about it. Everyone knows me. They come in. I know their other kids. They come back and I deliver their 2nd or 3rd kid. That's the lovely part about it, but you can get that in a small group practice. So if you're not looking to be on call all the time and you're not looking to be responsible for every paperclip in your office, then do something in between. But I wouldn't really recommend what I do for a lot of people because of how much headache I know it is. And plus, I mean, let's be honest, I don't make as much money as I would have made employed because everything I make depends on how busy I want to be, and what insurance companies want to pay me and all that. So I wouldn't strongly recommend what I do unless somebody has some real strong desire to be the whole show and know all their patients. That's kind of gone.
Right. But Rebecca, I have to say, one of the nice things I'm in solo practice also, patients come, they're coming for you, right? There's no question. If a woman comes to your office for care, they're coming to see you because there's nobody else there, right? They're not coming to see another doctor. They're coming for you, right? Which is
Like,
just
you're
a
not
really
coming because
nice.
it's Napa. It's like, I'm visiting Napa. I think I'll go to the gynecologist.
Right,
No.
exactly. Rebecca, one of the interesting things that I saw on your website is that you have at the top of the website, there's a couple of keywords, and one is OBGYN, like what's an OBGYN, and the second one is DO. So you have right on your website that you're a DO. Why do you find it important to put that you're a DO as the second tab on your website?
Probably the primary reason is because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding. People know I'm a doctor, but there's not a lot of knowledge, as you know, about what is a DO versus an MD. I just know that you're a doctor. And I still have people, including members of my own family, sometimes say, what is that DO that's on your name tag or something like that? And I always take it as an opportunity to educate them and to tell them the things that are similar and the things that are different between allopathic versus osteopathic physicians. But I think it should be right out there because, believe it or not, there are many people that come to me because of that. They've had some prior experience with an osteopathic physician and felt, whether they know it or not, that those tenets of osteopathic medicine were a big reason to stick with that doctor. And then they actively seek out someone who's also a DO, not knowing that a DO could also be an OBGYN in a lot of cases. So I think it's important for the educational aspect and for the I'm not hiding anything aspect, and also to tell people what they can expect. One thing, I'm sure you know, I was a physical therapist before I went to osteopathic school. And so I was very used to putting my hands on people before I ever went to medical school. So I do a lot of hands-on. I don't do a lot of OMM now because it's been so many years. I'm not an expert in it anymore. I used to be, but I feel like someone who's better equipped should do that. But, today, example, somebody came to me, I was taking care of her for a menopausal problem. And she said, and my elbow is just really bothering me. So I said, oh, let me see that, without even thinking. She must be, what are you doing looking at my elbow? You're a gynecologist. But I can evaluate, I can see whether this needs an x-ray, whether this is a muscle problem, et cetera. And in the past, definitely with my pregnant patients with low back pain and sacroiliac pain, I treat them.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about when you decided you were going to become an author, and tell us a little bit about the books that you've written. That's very cool.
I always was a writer. I always was involved in writing in some way. Like, I wrote for my college newspaper and things like that. And over the years, I always would come home and tell my husband or tell my kids, oh my God, you're not going to believe what happened today. And like, I delivered twins and this, and they were so used to that's the dinner table talk that a couple of times my kids, as they got older, or my husband would say, you got to write this stuff down because the way you tell it and the way we're listening to it so rapt is so amazing that you should put these stories together and tell it to everyone else. And it took me a long time to decide that I really was going to do that and put myself out there with that, because you probably can understand it's one thing to tell your friends and neighbors about an interesting story that happened. It's another thing to self-publish a book that's all the truth. No names, of course, but these are things that I've seen. These are things that I've done. And I'm amazed by them, and try to convey that in the written word so that people actually are page turning and going, wow, we are so interested in this. And then, of course, you look at your statistics or you look at your book sales and things like that. It's very humbling. The process of writing a book is very humbling because I had an editor and I would send it in and she'd send it back all full of red lines and, change this, change that. And I'm like, no, I want to say it that way. But she knew better than I did. And the end product, when you see other people reading it and enjoying it, and your sales are good, it's quite the accomplishment. So I wrote down the first book that I wrote, which is this one, Womb with a View.
It's a great name, by the way. What a great name.
This one has a subtitle, The Tales from the Delivery Room, the Emergency Room, and the Operating Rooms. And that basically is vignettes about different things that I saw or did while I was a resident, while I was a medical student. One of the stories is when I delivered my first baby. So things that really touched me. And I was really excited for people to read that and not only say it also touched them, but something that people tell me all the time is that when they read my writing, they hear me talking because I talk in a very specific way. I don't know if it's an accent. People go, I'm reading that and I'm hearing your voice. And that's the best.
So then tell us about the perimenopause for dummies.
What a different experience to write a book for a publisher that expects something of you. You know, you self-publish, you only expect of yourself, which is not too much. But about a year and a half ago, I got an email that was apparently from somebody at the Wiley Publishing Company who publishes all these books for dummies. There's a whole series. There's How to Do Anything for Dummies, Mathematics for Dummies, Accounting for Dummies. And she wrote me and said, hey, we've seen some of your work, which I have a lot of articles and things out there online. We know that you publish about menopause. We have a Menopause for Dummies book, but how would you like to write a perimenopause for dummies book? And I said, this is a scam. How much money are you expecting me to send you to publish my book? But they said, here's my information, and this is what we would like you to do. If you're interested, get back to us. So I did. And sure enough, they sent me immediately a contract, and oh boy, it has to be this many pages. And here's your outline, and a lot of if this, then this, like if you don't hand us 18 chapters by January 1st, then we can take back your advance or something like that. You know, I signed it all. I didn't care. But a very different process in, first of all, writing. They said it had to be a certain number of pages, and I wasn't sure I could write that many pages. But back and forth, back and forth. I would work all day and finish my day and go home and do all the writing and editing and everything at night and send it in, and they'd send it back and fix this, fix that. And the great thing is, if you've read dummies books, they all kind of have the same tongue-in-cheek kind of like, it's not really that they think you're a dummy. They just want to kind of bring it down to the easiest way to understand things. And I did that, but when people read it, they also came back to me and said, I hear you speaking in that book. And that was my biggest accomplishment, because they were telling me exactly what to write and how to write it. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to put myself in the book, which was important to me. And I think it sounds like me.
Sounds like it worked out great.
Yeah, so, and it's doing well. The only thing is they don't do a lot of marketing. They kind of expect you to do your own marketing. It's doing well on Amazon. It's always in the top 100 women's books on, you know, health and menopause. But they asked me, so do you have any book signings to do? And I did. You know, I have done a local book signing and hoping to do more, but I'm happy with it.
Very cool. Rebecca, we're going to change gears a little bit and go back to the beginning. Can you tell us where you grew up and where you went to college, and I guess how you started as a physical therapist? Can you get us through that?
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I was not really planning for big things with my life. I grew up in, you know, in Sheepshead Bay, which is a small neighborhoody place. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a clerk, like an office clerk, and also taught at night. So teaching was a really big thing in my family. So I always thought I was going to be a teacher. And I stayed home to go to college. My parents were of the mindset of, if you're not going to be a doctor, we're not sending you away to college. You can go someplace at home. So I actually went to a college in Brooklyn, St. Francis College, which was in downtown Brooklyn, Brooklyn Heights. And I started to study education so that I could be a teacher. And as soon as they put me in the classroom, I said, this is not for me. I said, I like to talk to people, but I don't really want to be up there in front of students. It's not my thing. But I was always really interested in health and sports and athletic things. I loved baseball. I played a lot of sports when I was a kid. And I thought maybe I'll do something kind of health-like, but not a doctor, because I didn't really feel like I had those kind of aspirations. And so I studied health sciences, got all my prerequisites to be a physical therapist. And then I went to graduate school and I got a master's. At that time, PT was a master's degree. Now it's a DPT. But I got a master's degree in physical therapy. However, the first semester that I was there, I went to BU, Boston University. The first semester that I was there, we were kind of mixed in with some first year medical students because we also did anatomy with dissection. We had cadavers and all that, and we did neuroanatomy. And I thought it was so hard and so interesting and exciting. And I met some of these first year medical students, and I was like, I bet you I could do that. I like that. So while I went to PT school and got my master's, I did my pre-med prerequisites. I went to the undergraduate part of BU and I took physics and I took organic chemistry at the same time.
Wow.
It was great. I don't know how I did that because that was really crazy. What I really wanted to do was pass, right? I just thought if I can just pass, then I can get to the MCAT, you know? And then I graduated, I got my master's degree in PT. I was still a few classes short of being able to apply to medical school because if you don't major in biology or anything that's similar when you're in college, you can't possibly have every single pre-medical prerequisite. So I had to take a few more things. So I worked for a couple of years as a PT, loved it, loved physical therapy. Physical therapists are much nicer than doctors. I mean, you have to say, they're much more into their patient care. They know their patients. It's a great profession. But I felt a little bit like as PTs, we were doing a lot of the hard work and a lot of the social part of helping people get better. And then the doctor, which was usually an orthopedist, and in those times things were a little bit different, would just send back a thing that says like 6 more weeks of physical therapy. And I'd be like, don't you even want to know what I did? So I felt like I'm going to do that. I want to be the person who says this is what to do with the patient. So I finished taking some prerequisite at night while I was working as a PT and applied to school, to a couple of different medical schools, got into a few in DO and MD. I felt like the osteopathic path was more for me. As I said before, working as a PT, you know the value of putting your hands on somebody. You know the value of helping somebody along the rehab road by actually doing something physical with them. So reading the osteopathic philosophy and knowing that NICOM was just right there in New York, I said, that's where I want to go. So I did.
Now, Rebecca, do you remember the first time that you found out about osteopathic medicine? Did you find out about it in physical therapy school or before that or while you were working?
I definitely found out more about it while I was a PT and some of the referrals that we would get from osteopaths, because of course, osteopaths can do all their own hands-on stuff, but when there are things that really do need rehabbing, they don't need to do that in the doctor's office. And I would get a referral from an osteopathic physician. I always felt like those referrals were much more complete. They really were focusing in. It wasn't just 6 weeks of physical therapy. It was more like, this has a muscle imbalance in, this area of the right lower extremity, and very focused. And so I felt like, who are these people who are giving me all these great referrals to do physical therapy on their patients and actually caring when I send the patient back to call me and say, they look so much better, or I don't know, they're just so much more involved. So that was for me.
When you were at NICOM and you were taking OMT classes, did you feel that some of it overlapped with the things that you had learned in physical therapy school, or would you say that OMT is completely different than what a physical therapist learns?
I would say there definitely are overlaps, and there definitely are things that we would do as osteopaths that physical therapists really shouldn't do, as far as some of the adjustments or high velocity things. So I felt like I had a lot of muscle energy techniques, and I had a lot of inhibition techniques and things that I was going to be able to continue to use. And at NICOM, I wasn't really a fellow, but I was a teaching assistant because I felt like I had a lot of that stuff down without having to go back to all the basics of how do you put your hands on somebody and all that.
Tell us when you decided you wanted to do OBGYN and how that came about.
That's a real light bulb moment. When I was in at NICOM. I don't know exactly how it is right now, but when I went to medical school, the first 2 years were pretty much not seeing patients at all. It was just in the classroom. So you did all this classroom for 2 whole years. You haven't really talked to a patient. And then all of a sudden, July 1st, your third year, now you're only in the clinics. So I went through my first 2 years of medical school saying, I am going to be a PM&R person. I'm going to be a physical medicine and rehab doctor. And I'm going to be able to formulate these great programs for people for rehabilitation, et cetera. So I went through it with real blinders on, with only that idea. So then in your third year, you don't really have a lot of control over what clinical rotations you do like you do in your fourth year, where they're electives. In the third year, they're very much, you have to go to pediatrics, you have to do internal medicine. So I went through them all with the idea that I'm only interested in physical medicine. And then I did my OB rotation, and I did it at Coney Island Hospital in Brooklyn. We had to be there to pre-round at like 4:45 in the morning, and then we would round, and the residents were unhappy people. They were always exhausted. They didn't teach us very much. I just thought, oh my God, how am I going to make it through this? And then I got onto the rotation where you do labor and delivery. And this is definitely a story in my first book where I was in the delivery room, of course, cowering like a third year medical student, like don't touch anything blue. And a midwife was doing a delivery, and I was just watching. And as the baby started to come down and she was sitting on that little rolling stool where you do the delivery, she looked around at me and she said, come on over here, put on some gloves. And I was like petrified. So I went over there. She said, you put your hands right here. And she put her hands over mine, and I delivered that baby. And that was, it sounds cliche, that light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, this is what I was called to do. It sounds so weird, but I never looked back. I never looked back. I finished that rotation. And then in my fourth year, I did 4 electives in all the OBGYN stuff. I did GYN oncology. I did MFM, maternal fetal medicine. I did all the things I could do to ingratiate myself to somebody who might want a DO, because guess what? I was on Long Island. And even though there's a DO medical school there in that time, which was many years ago, we were not getting into programs that were allopathic programs. And there were no osteopathic OBGYN programs where I lived. And guess what? Just to add to my history, while I was in medical school, I had 2 kids. I had 2 babies during medical school. So it took me 5 years to get through medical school instead of 4, because I took 6 months and then 6 months. But I couldn't go anywhere. My husband at the time was working on Long Island. I had 2 little babies. I needed a nanny. I had to be on Long Island. And the only hospitals on Long Island at that time were Winthrop, North Shore, where I went, which is Nassau County, now Nassau University Medical Center, and Stony Brook. Those were the only places. So that's where I applied. And if you want me to continue my story, I did not match anywhere, and was crushed because I had done rotations at all of those places. They knew me, but nobody wanted to take a DO, apparently. However, I can tell you the rest of the story, which is a happy ending, but really terrible story. There was one DO in the program at Nassau County Medical Center, and he was going to be a senior the year I was going to come in, if I had gotten in. And when I didn't match, I actually accepted a pediatric spot at another hospital. Sadly, but resigned. And about 5 days before I was supposed to start my orientation at that other hospital, I got a call from the one DO student who was a resident at Nassau County Medical Center, and called me, and he said, they're opening up a spot, a first-year spot that was a non-ongoing spot. It was a 1-year position. If you want that spot, you should come here. And I think the phone was still, the cartoon where they drop the phone and they're gone with the wind. I went there before I even probably hung up the phone, and went into the office of the chairman of the OBGYN department there. And I was like, please, I begged him to take me as a 1-year non-continuing spot in that program. And they signed me.
Okay, Rebecca. So a couple of things. First of all, I would be really nervous. I mean, you're going to be a pediatrician, right? You have that spot that's already done, or you could take this 1-year spot. Now, what happens if they're not planning on keeping you, right? The residency is 4 years at that point, right? OBGYN's
Mhm.
4 years.
Mhm.
So if it doesn't work out, then what are you going to do, right? Then you're like
Yep.
scrambling for a spot somewhere else or looking at another specialty or what have you.
Yep.
So you said you almost dropped the phone. I would think that's a hard decision to make.
It was hard, but it would buy me a year. And you know what that resident DO told me? He said, someone always drops out after the first year because this program is hard. And I said, I'll believe you. And guess what? No one dropped out.
Oh no.
So this is what they said to me. This is my story in my writings, but basically, I took the spot. I worked for a year with 4 other first years who I knew were going on, unless one of them royally screwed up. So I didn't see any reason to not help them with things or to not take their call if they asked me or whatever. I was very amenable. And so the first year ended, nobody dropped out. They offered me to repeat my first year in an ongoing spot, in a categorical spot, I guess they call it, to stay for the next 4 years. So it would take me 5 years instead of 4. And I said, okay. I repeated my first year. And of course, who loved me? In the delivery room in July, they loved me as the intern who was doing the delivery room because I had a year of experience behind me and everyone else was coming in green. So they gave me the delivery room for the first block of my new second time intern year. I also asked them if, see, in the first year, they got at least 2 to 3 months of electives. And I had already done them in my first year. So like I did the ER, I did the NICU, I did, all the things that were not really OBGYN, but you had to do them as electives in your first year. So I had some extra time. I asked them if I could spend the extra time doing things that would help me move ahead. Like the second years, they could always use help in family planning clinic. Can I do 6 weeks in that? They let me do the things that the second years were doing because they needed extra hands. So I got more second year experience in my second intern year. And then guess what? Somebody dropped me to the third year. So it only took me 4 years to do my residency. A
Amazing.
miracle.
More things I want to talk to you about. So you talked about North Shore Winthrop, and my background is I actually did my medicine at North Shore, but I'll tell you, most of my medical school rotations, it's now called NUMIC, Nassau County Medical Center. But I had such a great experience in medical school at a public hospital that I loved my private residency. But when I did my fellowship, my thought was, I want to go back to a public place to do my fellowship because that's where I think you get the best training. So tell us, do you think it benefited you over what you would have gotten at a more ivory tower type institution?
100%. I felt that when I graduated those 4 years, and then your last year, of course, being chief resident and kind of running the place, I could do anything. I had so much experience with people who had put off their medical care for so long. So you see all the emergencies. We did so much emergency surgery. I felt like I saw the gamut of anything that you could see in OBGYN in those 4 years and things I didn't necessarily want to continue to see again, let's say in private practice, because they're so high risk and people die and get very sick. But we saw it all. And I chose, number one, I felt so elated and appreciative to be in that place where they didn't want me initially. I had to repeat the year. I finally got to a spot. I decided to appreciate everything in that place, including all the hard work, all the nights I had to be there, all the things that you see there that you just feel like this is crazy that I'm seeing so much medicine and so many emergencies and things that you don't see other places. And I remember the very first time coming out as a new attending, because I did work on Long Island for like 10 years after I graduated from there. The first time I was in a delivery room, I thought, oh my God, these things are so run of the mill and easy, like just a regular old delivery without like preeclampsia and people seizing and all these things. So you feel like you're up here and you could take care of anything, but most of what was happening at that time was kind of down there. Now things are a little different. There's a lot of high risk stuff going on with COVID and all that. But at that time, I felt really well equipped to take care of anything.
And then Rebecca, your whole story makes me think of a quote. luck is where preparation meets opportunity, right? I mean, that's the story you just told.
100%. Yeah.
So you just didn't take no for an answer. You took a 1 year spot knowing that that may be the end of your road. Then you agreed to repeat another year. I mean, that's crazy to me. Like, I mean, I think I would have
It
just
was
tried and
crazy, but you
quit.
know
Yeah.
what? I was an older person with two kids, couldn't leave Long Island, and this is what was there. So I could leave medicine or I could make my whole family move for a not sure spot somewhere else. I didn't look at it like it'll just work out. I looked at it as like, this is what I have now, and this is what I want to do. So if I have to repeat my first year 3 times, I'm going to do it.
That's awesome. I don't think I would have been able to do that. I think that's an amazing story.
Looking back, looking back, the fact that I had 2 babies while I was in medical school, what was wrong with me? I don't know.
So then, Rebecca, tell us about your first job and tell us about working on Long Island. What made you ultimately decide to move to California?
So my first job was also kind of a fluky thing. When I was just about to finish my residency, I was talking to a financial counselor because, when you finish residency, you're now going to make some money. You think, oh, let's look somebody up and hire them to tell me what to do with my money besides pay back loans and whatever. Hired a financial guy who came to speak with my husband and myself, and just chatting about things. He said, hey, my wife is a nurse practitioner and she works in an office in Massapequa, an OBGYN office. She's a women's health practitioner. I said, oh, who is that? Okay, more weird things that just happened to fall together. When I was in my 3rd year of medical school, just backing up a minute, how I said all those residents were so tired at Coney Island Hospital and it was really hard to get any teaching in. However, there was an attending there who was the GYN oncologist in Coney Island Hospital and at Maimonides. Those were 2 connected hospitals. And as a 3rd year, you don't get to go into the OR very much, except maybe to stand in the background or to hold a retractor if you're lucky. This attending, who had a very long, very recognizable name, let me go in the OR with him because he told me one day, if you know all the anatomy, I'll let you come in on my hysterectomy that I do tomorrow. And I was like, yay, I'll get the anatomy. So went in, and it was the most beautiful, bloodless hysterectomy that of course, how many did I see at that point? Maybe 3, and he was so nice and teaching me and everything that I thought, oh, wow, if I ever get an opportunity to work with someone like him, that would be great. Okay, now fast forward to this financial guy that comes to my house and tells me that his wife works in this office. And he goes, yeah, she works for a doctor named, and he tells me the same last name as that guy that was a teacher to me in my 3rd year. Turns out they're husband and wife. He was a GYN oncologist. She was a general OBGYN with her own practice in Massapequa, and she was looking for another doctor.
Perfect,
I was
right?
like, this is my calling. I called them up. They interviewed me. She hired me. And I started working full time in what was a group practice. Like she and I were the 2 doctors, and we had a nurse practitioner. And it was a pretty busy, medium-sized OBGYN practice. And we shared call with some other people. And that was my first big girl job out of residency. And she taught me a lot. They let me kind of slide in a little at a time, saw what I could do, soon had my own patients and was doing rotating call with them. I loved it. And I worked there for about 10 or 11 years. The unfortunate reality of me finishing my residency and going into private practice is that my first marriage broke up around that time. And I continued to work in the practice, and we had like shared custody, and he would take the kids sometimes and I would sometimes. And then around that time, I met my now current husband at a medical conference. He's not a doctor, but he was in a restaurant somewhere that I had gone to during a medical conference, and we met. And he was living here in California and I was living in New York, and we started to kind of correspond across the country. And for me, I was like, I'm really busy. I have 2 little kids. I don't have time for a relationship. There was no internet or FaceTime or anything like that. We would like email back and forth, and we got to know each other. And we got to know each other little by little. And he would come visit me. I would come visit him in California. And after about 8 years of that practice. And she had also taken on another doctor, and the two doctors were partners in the practice. And I kind of didn't want to partner because I felt like I didn't want to ensconce myself in being on Long Island forever. I kind of got the idea that once I met this person, who's Bill, who's now my husband, I had a feeling I might be moving at some point. So I said, no, I'll just stay employed. You two guys run the practice. And then lo and behold, the practice broke up. And neither of them wanted to hire me as working for them. They both wanted to go off and do their own things. And that was the time I thought, okay, this is the time for me to move to California.
Awesome.
So, yeah. So my kids at the time, my son was ready for college and my daughter was still in high school. So my son went off to college and my daughter moved with me to California. And my husband and I, in the interim, as we were visiting each other back and forth, had another baby. So now he has two, I have two from previous, and now we have one together. And so I just moved to California with the younger boy and my daughter who was in high school. And that's when I went to work for the group practice that was out here that I started out with. So it's a long journey and a lot of stories. And this is why I have to write them down.
Right. A lot more books coming. You're also involved, I understand, with Tour California and teaching DO students. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I always have been involved with teaching ever since I've been an attending physician. Like I did teach at NICOM. I would always go back there and teach the second year OB/GYN curriculum, some of it. And I sometimes would take medical students, fourth year, preferably in the office when I worked on Long Island. And here, Toro is in Vallejo, California, which is about 50-minute drive from Napa. The school is lovely. It's on an island. I'm sure you know about that. It's on Mare Island, and it used to be an old Army barracks place. It's very nice. And I contacted them when I was out here and said, hey, I'm in California. I'm willing to take students in my office, only fourth years. And they contacted me to come and teach at the school. So I, again, went back and taught some of the second year curriculum when it was COVID. I did it on video. And then I take a lot of students in my office. I would say every couple of months, I've got a fourth year student here, and they either stay for 2 or 4 weeks. They do an office GYN rotation with me. We do a lot of teaching. I get a lot of requests. Like I get a lot of people emailing me saying, can I have this slot? Can I have that slot? You know, it's hard to take students in the office, even though it's rewarding and I love to teach. It slows me down. It makes me stay later because I finish notes at the end of the day instead of doing them in between my patients because I'm teaching them. But I've really gotten a lot of really good feedback. The very first student that I ever had in the office is like now a hematologist oncologist somewhere. So it's really rewarding. I really like the idea of imparting information to students. And the best response that I get afterwards is they write me back and they go, it's good to know that there's still someone, or I'm sure there's other people besides me, but they don't see a lot of this on their rotations. It's good to know that there's still someone who takes their time with the patients and explains and sits and is concerned about all of the things that the patient came in, complaining about. So, because, a lot of their rotations are clinics and they're very busy and they don't have time and no one has time to really teach them about it. So I get a lot of good feedback about how they love having been in this setting.
That's awesome. Rebecca, our final grand finale question is, can you give us one piece of advice that you were given from someone else that you have found impactful in your career that you would like to pass on to our listeners?
I have to say, it is that you cannot save everyone. Because I would always come home at the end of a difficult day or difficult labor and difficult delivery and be so upset with, I won't even say bad outcomes, but outcomes that were not what I had wanted or expected, or just frustrating. And I would be it would really wrap me up. And my husband and other people would really say, you really have to focus on what you can do, not that you want to make it better for everybody, because that's really not in your power. A little shocking for me to say that something is not in my power, but accepting that and telling that to other people is the way you get through this. Because every day we see in the office people that haven't been taken care of well, are on the wrong medications, haven't had good relationships with their doctors. And there's a lot of mess to clean up. And you can only do what you can do, in other words. And that has to be enough. It has to make you not frustrated that the rest is not in your power.
I think that's excellent advice. And it's definitely not easy as a doctor who cares like you are to understand that you do your best sometimes and things just don't work out the way that you want them to. And there's nothing you can do. All right, Rebecca, that's awesome. Thank you so much for spending time with us tonight.
Thank you. This has been fantastic.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there is someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tianyu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.